simply an invitation to voter fraud, though of course it's definitely that. But more important, perhaps, it is a virtual guarantee that in November we will see a swarm of lawyers arguing which votes should be counted. It won't be a question of who got the most votes, it'll be a question of who has the most lawyers. And that is a contest Democrats think they can win. It's happened several times this year already, by the way, in various races around the country. In New York, for example, a recent congressional primary, mail-in voting meant that judges spent weeks deciding how to count votes that were postmarked late or arrived late. The Democratic operatives who run Joe Biden's campaign know this, of course, which is why they're trying to tell you you're not allowed to criticize mail-in voting. Anything that increases their power, you may not question. In this case, they want the uncertainty over the outcome of the election so they can manipulate the results. And they're not even really trying to hide this. The campaign recently created what is called a special litigation unit, which needs to say is staffed with hundreds of lawyers to handle election disputes. This is the party of lawyers. It's one thing they have a lot of. It's the party of the trial bar. One attorney working in that group is a Democratic operative called Mark Elias. Elias has spent the year fighting state laws that outlaw something called ballot harvesting, maybe the most egregious thing we allow in any election in this country. It is the practice that allows political operatives to collect ballots from people and turn them in en masse. It is an invitation to fraud, which is exactly why Democrats want it to be national policy with no restrictions at all. Someone who's been watching all of this is Darren Beattie. He's a former speechwriter for President Trump. He works now with Revolver News, the website. He says this is part of a familiar plan. In a recent piece, Revolver argued that Democratic operatives, including some who testified during the impeachment proceedings, are adopting the same tactics that U.S. intel agencies use to start so-called color revolutions in places like Ukraine. Darren Beattie joins us tonight to explain. Darren, thanks so much for coming on. So, for our viewers who are not familiar with the color revolutions in Eastern Europe, state as clearly as you can what you think is going on right now in this election. What's the end game for Democrats?
Yes, thank you for having me. Many have described the actions taken against Trump as a coup, and this is certainly correct, but it's a little bit general and vague. What's unfolding before our eyes is a very specific type of coup called the color revolution. It's a regime change model favored by many in our national security apparatus, particularly against Eastern European countries, to overthrow target regimes that they don't like. One model, which is not the color revolution model, is purely sending a bunch of troops into a country and removing by military force a leader you don't like. That's like the Iraq model.
Right.
The color revolution model is a little bit more delicate and subtle, has several characteristics, but the chief characteristics of it is a combination of an engineered contested elections scenario combined with massive mobilized protests, which they call as a term of art, peaceful protests, and acts of civil disobedience. If that sounds familiar, it gets even better. It's not only the same strategies and tactics used against Trump that's used against Eastern European dictators that our national security apparatus doesn't like. It's literally the same people who are color revolution professionals who have a long history of using these same tactics against foreign leaders they don't like to use against democratically elected President Donald Trump. It's the same people using the very same playbook. Now, I'd like to talk about one of the key figures in this operation, a nexus point not only between color revolutions overseas and the color revolution against Trump, but a nexus point between lawfare and mass mobilization and so-called peaceful protests. This is a man by the name of Norm Eisen. Norm Eisen is a key legal hatchet man, Democrat operative, former Obama ethics czar, believe it or not. And he is also a key architect of nearly every effort to censor, sue, impeach, and overthrow the president. He is the author of, in fact, a color revolution playbook, literally called the playbook. And one of the items he calls for in his playbook to overthrow regimes overseas he doesn't like is engineering election fraud scenarios using election fraud to engineer mass protests to question the legitimacy of the target leader. Norm Eisen has a long and checkered history going all the way back to his days at Crew, which is a lawfare arm. He's been behind over 180 lawsuits against Trump. He authored 10 articles of impeachment before the president's phone call was even made. He was special counsel to the Democrats for the impeachment process. He was literally involved in every aspect of this color revolution against Trump. His latest act, and perhaps his greatest act coming up, is to use lawfare in order to overturn the 2020 election using various legal theories, principally his theory about
Norm Eisen. Remember the name. I'm sorry, Darren, we're out of time. I appreciate that. We'll be right back. Thank you.